suppose I'm a bit of a, I won't say oddball, but certainly a hybrid in terms of academia. My career was in the military police for 22 years. I then, after interviewing child victims of sexual abuse, I became very, very interested in how they were able to disclose serious crimes of that nature to a complete stranger, and what it was about me that I could actually get them to open up. So I became very, very interested in psychology. I took the very hard route. I then went down an open university degree for 6 years, followed by a part-time MSc in forensic psychology, and then a part-time PhD in forensic psychology. I now work mostly on the investigation side, so I deal very much with the police and law enforcement agencies, and I do a lot of work with the United Nations and the International Criminal Court, helping them investigate some of the more heinous crimes that are committed throughout the world.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Julie Hughes, so I'm the chair of the Division of Academics, Researchers and Teachers in Psychology, and currently I'm an academic psychologist at Keele University, which is in North Staffordshire in the Midlands. I went via a kind of twisty-turny route, so I never intended to study psychology at all in the first place. I turned up at university as a mature student, thinking, I'll study biology and biochemistry, that's what I'll do, and then had a bit of a nervous panic. I went, I can't possibly do two really hard sciences, what looks easy? Don't tell anybody at the BPS that I said that. So I did a joint honours degree in psychology and biology, and really loved both pathways through my degree, and picked to do a PhD in neuroscience, which kind of landed me squarely in the middle, and thought I was going to be a biologist for quite a long time, and then discovered that I really loved teaching. So I did a part-time PhD, and while I was doing my part-time PhD in neuroscience, I did some teaching at a local FE college. So I was teaching A-levels and GCSEs, and I did some teaching at universities, and I got absolutely fascinated by the processes of learning and teaching. And that took me into a career far different from what I expected, where I ended up researching education and really kind of got excited by what it is that I can do as a teacher to help my students to learn most effectively. So that's where I am. So I'm now working in a university environment, but I still do quite a lot of sixth forms, I do a lot in outreach, and I also work in staff development. So a really fun and interesting and diverse career.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we'll open the floor to our first question submitted from Slido, which is highlighted in blue. This is a question for all panel members. What should you consider when applying for a research PhD in psychology? And what is the best preparation or experience you can do to help applications? So whoever would like to jump in.
Shall I pick that one up first?
Yeah.
As the person in the room with a PhD in neuroscience. But I also supervise PhD students at the moment. I've got 3 PhD students and one who's completed. I think the important thing if you want to do a PhD is to be thinking about what you love about your subject. Don't pick a PhD because it's the things that will get you a job, because it's the things that somebody else thinks is the right thing to do or the prestigious thing to do. You are going to eat, sleep, and breathe that subject for at least 3 years. It's very rare that anybody finishes in less than 3. So pick the things that you know you can get up every morning and think, way, hey, I'm going to read the millionth paper that I've ever read on the same topic today, and I'm really excited about it. Be passionate about what you want to do and what topic you're looking at. Don't just pick something because the opportunity is there. I would also say research your supervisor or your intended supervisor. Have a chat to their current PhD students. Don't just take their word for it that they're going to be a good supervisor. Really do your research, find out what their current students think of them. Are they available when they say that they will be? Do they spend an entire year overseas and not speak to you? That actually happened to me. Find out what the current students think of that person. So know your subject, be interested in your subject, and know your supervisor. Have those conversations with them beforehand. Make sure that you can work with them because it's a really intense working relationship. Anybody else have any advice? No. I think that covers it. No?
Okay, thank you very much. Excellent response. So what you might notice is that the number of questions up here keeps changing. So if you go on slido.com, you can actually see all of the questions that are being submitted and to vote for the ones that you would like to see being answered. I think we'll pick up the more general one, which has got the 16 votes, and then we'll come back to the one on clinical psychology. So Again, a question for the panel. To what extent does the university you attend influence your chances of getting a job in the more competitive areas of psychology? I don't know.
Go on, Gavin.
If anybody would like to dive in.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. I think there's a lot of, I need to be very careful with my words here. I think there's a lot of people who think if you go to a Russell Group university, you're going to be guaranteed to get a job. I think I'm safe to say that that is not the case. I think if the research you're doing is groundbreaking and you have the good supervisor and you're being published in high quality journals, I honestly don't think it makes any difference what university you attend at that level. My colleagues might disagree there, but I did my PhD at Portsmouth University, which is a great university, but it's a post-92 university. I worked at Teesside University, another post-92 university, and now I'm at Newcastle. And all universities have their own strengths and weaknesses, no matter where you go. So I don't think it will make much difference.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. I've supervised quite a few PhD students, and they've all gone on to really good careers. And one of my PhD students now, for example, is the head sports psychologist at Manchester City Football Club. And she did it here at Northumbria. So I don't think you could get a better job if you want to be a sports psychologist.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it comes back to what Jemima said it's about how you think about the things that you're experiencing, I guess, rather than necessarily which uni you get it from. It's how you can apply what you're learning to a clinical setting for clinical psychology. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for those of you who are still at undergraduate level as well, the same thing applies. We've focused a little bit on PhDs, but even for undergraduate psychology, I think the important thing is that your degree is a psychology degree, and what we underestimate a lot of the time is the real value of psychology. So I don't know if any of you have ever looked at, it's a really dry document, the QAA subject benchmark for psychology. It tells you what you can do as a psychology student, and it's quite amazing. So it talks about psychology as being a science subject, which is fantastic. So you've got those numeracy skills, those data analysis skills, critical thinking, evidence-based, all of that. But also it talks about it being wider than that. So it makes it a STEM plus subject. It says, well, what you can do is you've got all the interpersonal skills and you've got the ability to communicate, to write essays, to speak, to interact with individuals, to understand human behaviour. So you're a scientist with extra stuff. And I think sometimes we don't think about what you get out of your degree in terms of employability. And the important thing for me is that you can articulate that in whatever job you want to go into. It really doesn't matter which degree you did, which university you went to get that. What you need is to be able to articulate the skill set that you've got and to really value your psychology education.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. So we'll now go on to the most popular question. Experience before applying as an assistant psychologist. Are there any ways to work or volunteer within the NHS in a clinical setting? If yes, how can I access those opportunities?
So just to say a bit about me, I guess my undergrad degree was in sports science, and then I did the conversion in psychology at Leeds Beckett. And while I was doing the conversion part-time, I got a job as a support worker. And there's lots of opportunities as support workers to work in clinical settings. So I was a support worker in acute mental health settings and then in eating disorders. And it's really on the ground working with clients. And it gave me really good experience at supporting clients in distress. And I guess lots of skills that then I could draw on in my application to become an assistant psychologist. And I think, thinking about what I learned and how that made me a better candidate for an assistant psychologist was really valuable. So, and there's lots of volunteering opportunities as well out there. Get involved with the careers at your university. That's how I found out about volunteering opportunities and NHS jobs for support worker roles. Open that in. Anything else, anyone? Yeah? Sorry.
I was at a meeting of Health Education England a couple of weeks ago. In my role as chair of DART-P. And one of the things that they're looking at is ways of getting psychology graduates working in the NHS in psychologically focused careers. So you might have heard of the psychological wellbeing practitioner role. those are going to be rolled out more, and there's going to be more roles like them. So they're looking at things like associate clinical psychologists, and it will be jobs for people who graduate with an undergraduate degree or with a master's who then want to go and work in those settings. So the idea is that there'll be structured career pathways, and they'll link up with clinical psychologists with specialisms in eating disorders or substance abuse or whatever it might be. So I think those jobs, they said at this HEE meeting that there's going to be an extra 21,000 jobs working in the NHS, 6,500 of which are going to be for psychology graduates. So I would say if you then want to get into an assistant psychologist job, that's going to be a really good preparation ground for you, because you'll be working with patients. And I know that that's difficult in a voluntary setting because sometimes confidentiality means that you can't shadow a clinical psychologist or a forensic psychologist. The other thing is have a look at your jobs bank and volunteering bank within your students' unions, because I know I was really surprised. I thought, there won't be anything that's psychology relevant. It'll all be like marketing assistants and stuff like that. It really isn't. We've got jobs working in prisons and all sorts of things on our work bank. So, get those experience points, if you like. Sign up for that.
Just as kind of a follow-up question, is there any particular websites or anything that you'd recommend keeping an eye on for opportunities coming up that applies to the whole panel?
Shopping websites.
BPS?
Yeah, I guess...
The NHS jobs.
Yeah, the NHS jobs, yeah.
With NHS jobs, you can set up alerts. So for support worker roles or assistant psychologist jobs, you could set up an alert that when the new jobs come up, that it kind of lets you know via email, I think. The BPS pre-qualification group, we host events and things like that might help you on your journey into becoming a psychologist, so getting assistant roles. So follow them on social media. I've got some information out there that you can look at. So I guess following them will help kind of keep you up to date with various events and things. I don't know about specific.
Keep an eye as well on what's happening in your own university, because sometimes you'll get internships advertised. So, for example, we'll employ students over the summer for 8 weeks on student research internships, often working with clinical patients to support staff research. It's great experience, it's paid, and it's in the summer, so it's not going to interfere with your studies.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so next question. What's the best advice for someone who isn't sure which route to take? I'm just graduating off the MSc Psychology, and there are so many interesting and inspiring areas. What would you suggest?
I suppose it brings up what you were saying before about PhDs. I think you've got to be, and I've been chatting to numerous kind of students and parents alike today about, you've got to be passionate about what you want to do. If you're not passionate to do any course or any degree or any job, it could be quite difficult for you. So whatever your heart is telling you, I think that's what you should be looking at, because you will have to do this course or the program for a number of years to be qualified. So it has to be something that you want to do.
I'm going to disagree. I'm not really. I'm going to agree, but I'm going to add a sort of proviso. Yeah. I've taken the most twisty, turny, illogical path through my career that I can possibly imagine. And I will say to you, it's never too late to change your mind. So actually, we lie to kids. We do. We tell them, we ask them the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And when they're 7, they're supposed to have an answer, and then they're supposed to work towards it. And you guys are supposed to all know what you want to be when you grow up. Yeah. And so am I. And I don't. And I'm 47 and a grandma, and I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And that's okay, because you can change direction. And I've done it. I've taught in sixth forms. I've been a researcher. I'm now a teaching-focused academic who absolutely loves what I do, but I might not do it forever. And I would say, actually, being an academic, for me, is one of the best things in the world, because it means that I can be varied in my career. So I get to teach students. I get to teach on lots of different subjects. So I still teach bits of neuroscience, which is what my PhD was in, but I get to teach about education and employability. And I get to train my colleagues and do staff development around learning and teaching. And I get to do management, and I get to do admin. And all of those things, but it's a really varied job, and I never wake up in the morning and think, I'm going to be really bored at work today, so yes, I would recommend my own job, but also I would say, it's never too late to change direction. And the experience that you get, you'll get skills that you can take with you into a different career later.
But she is passionate.
I am.
You also might want to look carefully at what the career pathways are and what the degrees that you're doing in order to get into your chosen career would involve. So, for example, in sports psychology, as in occupational and health, you normally would do a 1-year master's degree and then a minimum of 2 years supervised experience. And you do a different kind of pathway if you're going into clinical, educational. So look carefully at what you've got to do and whether those kind of pathways would be appealing to you. You know, the kind of placements that you would do in sports psychology would be very specific to your interests. So make sure that you choose something that I agree with the idea that you want to be passionate about it. Make sure you choose something because you're going to be living that for a long time.
Okay. Next question up. Does one have to do a master's degree to become a chartered psychologist?
In which area?
I was going to say, if you could speak to your own areas, if that's okay. So forensic psychology.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of forensic psychology, to be fully qualified forensic psychologist or chartered, you would have to do the stage 1, which is the MSc in forensic psychology, which must be accredited by the British Psychological Society. There are a number of courses out there that aren't, but you have to have it that's accredited. The second part is, my colleague was saying earlier, you have to have 2 years supervised practice, being supervised by a fully qualified forensic psychologist. It doesn't matter where or what area, but it has to be somebody who's fully qualified. I say a minimum of 2 years. It can take considerably longer than that. But once you've done stage 1 and stage 2, you can then apply to be on the register for the Health and Care Professions Council and be a registered practitioner psychologist in forensic psychology. Anybody else want to?
So for clinical, your undergrad must be eligible for GBC, and then you, similarly to the other types, you need 2 years experience before you can then apply for the clinical psychology doctorate. So you don't necessarily need to have a master's. I don't know, is yours any different?
Yeah. Teaching's a little bit different. You might expect that. So in research, as long as you have a PhD that's been supervised by a qualified psychologist, you can become a chartered psychologist after 2 years experience. So that's pretty similar. You've got to get your doctorate and you've got to have your 2 years experience. In teaching, we deliberately created a slightly different route into chartered psychologist status. So through DART-P, you can become a chartered psychologist through teaching, and then you don't have to have a master's. So you could do the standard progression route into teaching, which would be to do your undergraduate degree, usually with graduate basis for chartership, and then to do your teacher training qualification, which is often a PGCE, and then 2 years experience of teaching psychology, and that could get you chartered psychologist status. We're a little bit flexible, I think, and I think the BPS is getting more flexible about chartered psychologist status in terms of first degrees not always being recognised as GBC and things. So students who come from international backgrounds now can get chartered psychologist status if they show that they've kind of topped up their knowledge in other ways. So I think, there are ways of doing it, but I think through teaching is probably one of the more flexible routes.
Thank you very much. So the next most popular question, do you always need to have a good 2-1 degree to get into the PhD for clinical, or do they consider experience and work references over grades?
Send the microphone that way.
Yeah, keep it there.
What was the question? Do you always need a good
Do you always need to have a good 2-1 class degree to get into the PhD for clinical, or do they consider experience and work references over grades?
So I believe, so I'm applying to the doctorate at the minute. So, but because my undergrad wasn't psychology, I think it's a bit different. But I think because the doctorate programs are with different universities, they all, please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if anyone else knows, they're all different. Yeah, so
some will let you in the 2-2.
yeah. Yeah, so check, it's all done through Clearinghouse for the doctorate. So if you go on Clearinghouse, it will tell you the entry requirements for each uni, and they all are slightly different. So you need to check for which uni you're thinking of applying to for that one.
What about,
Thank you.
Because you've done a conversion course,
Yeah.
right? So what was your kind of path?
So
Did you have to get like a high grade in the conversion course, not a full bachelor's?
so you, for the ones that I'm applying for, they see the conversion as kind of undergrad, but not all of the unis are like that in terms of how they see the conversion. Some stipulate you need to have different grades in that, and some unis still look at your undergrad even if it isn't in psychology. So yeah, you really need to look at which uni you're thinking of applying for to see and what their requirements are for the conversion and for your undergrad as well. I hope that answers it.
No, good response.
Can I pick up one thing?
Yeah,
Sorry. Sorry, I also think, again, that my advice about it's never too late can sometimes rescue you here. So you can sometimes turn your fortunes if you didn't do as well in your undergrad as you hoped and you think that that's going to close the door on you. Sometimes doing a master's degree as a follow-up and getting a good grade in that. So you think, actually, I know that I messed about during my undergrad. I've grown up a bit more now.
Yeah.
I'll do my master's. Getting that merit or distinction at masters can actually put that academic record right.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if you want to go into clinical, it's persistence.
Yeah.
I had a student who did a conversion course about 12 years ago now. He was an exceptional student. He had 300 participants in his final year project. He got a first across the board. He was a brilliant student. Took him 10 years to get into clinical, and he got loads of relevant experience. Now, that's not to put you off clinical, but it's to say that, you've really got to be determined that it's for you, and you've got to work towards it and be prepared to pick yourself up, dust yourself off and start all over again.
Yeah, and I guess to illustrate that, so in my undergrad, I got a 2-1, but it was a low 2-1. So then I've done the conversion on top of that, and some unis for the clinical would still want a master's on top of that because my original degree wasn't a high 2-1. So yeah, it's not all, you can buffer these things with other things, but then that isn't always necessary as well. It's seeing which university needs what. Really, that would be my advice.
Have a chat to the admissions tutors. Get to know them, because actually who you know and the relationship that you have is probably more important than your qualifications sometimes. Impress them.
And again, it comes back to thinking about how you use what you've learned and how you can apply it as well. That's really important.
Okay, this question's been hovering for a while. It's just vanished actually as well. Which was the stats one? No, there was a question that's been hovering for a while there. What piece of advice would you give to somebody who's really afraid of statistics? What one piece of advice you'd give to someone doing a BSc in psychology who has difficulties and is concerned about understanding statistics and data? Which is a very common concern.
Yeah.
Okay, I meet this quite a lot. You would imagine teaching in a university. I have quite a lot of students who are very worried, quite genuinely, about statistics. I used to be worried about statistics too, and now I quite enjoy them, and I see them as a really useful tool. And I would say, for anybody, anything that's worth having, anything that's worth doing is difficult. Yes, it is hard sometimes to get your head around a statistical test or a cognitive model of memory or how synapses work in the brain or whatever it might be. Some of psychology is hard. It is. And some of it you'll find hard and your friend won't, and the other way around. But you just have to keep going. And rather than thinking, I'm not good at maths, tell yourself, I'm not good at maths yet. A little bit of resilience, a little bit of determination goes a long way. I remember being that student sobbing over not being able to understand what variance and standard deviation and ANOVAs and all that was. Now I love it. I really, really genuinely do. You can turn it around. It's a tool. Most of your stats is done on some sort of software, so you'll be using SPSS or R or something like that. You don't need to be good at maths to do stats. What you need is to be able to know how to put information into a computer and how to understand the information that comes out. You'll never have to do that in the real world without a textbook in front of you. I have my statistics Bible. I happen to like Andy Field's book, but there's lots of other books that people enjoy. And I still pick that book up off my shelf probably 2 or 3 times a day and say, how do I do this? I don't remember it. It's not about remembering. It's about just not being scared to look it up and go and have a chat with people. I go and talk to a colleague and say, when do I use a manoeuvre and when do I use an anchover? And they'll tell me. They're amazing. You don't have to do it on your own. Work together in groups, but really try and just kind of persevere with it.
I've also found quite often that the more research you read, the more you can kind of contextualize the statistics that you would need to use. So, you read a paper and they're comparing 3 groups, and so they do an ANOVA, and it suddenly dawns on you, now I understand why you do that test. So a lot of our students have found that the more they read, the better equipped they are to use statistics.
Yeah.
So next up, I think it's a question that applies to everybody in the panel. Would you recommend doing a master's before your PhD, or is it possible to jump straight into a PhD, presumably from an undergrad course, in your own respective areas?
Well, in sports psychology, you definitely need to do either a master's after your undergraduate, or there are just a couple of places around the UK that have a professional doctorate instead. So but normally you would do the master's, and as we were saying, then go on to do stage 2, which is your experience that you would do over a minimum of 2 years.
I mean, certainly in forensic, I have known individuals that have gone direct from undergraduate to a PhD. I think that's becoming less and less, and a lot of people are doing the MSc because they don't feel confident. After I'd finished my undergraduate degree, I didn't think I was able to do a PhD at that point, probably because I came in as a latecomer. I was a mature student, opened things up here. I'd left school with no qualifications at all, and then I realised that actually I was quite good at education, so I was really doubting myself all the way through. And I did the MSc and thought, no, I can do this. I'm capable of doing this. I'm good at this, and I got a distinction. And so it worked for me, but I do know other far more intelligent people than me who have gone on to do a PhD direct from undergraduate.
I think you're right that it's changing. So I think I went straight from my undergraduate into my PhD. I don't know many people that are doing that now. So when I look at my colleagues who, and I'm often on the interview panel for early career lecturers, and when I look at their CVs, most of them have done an MSc before they've done a PhD. And I think an MSc gives you that edge if you're trying to get into a competitive area as well. So I think there's an increasing trend for people to do masters before PhDs, but that doesn't mean it's impossible to go straight into a doctorate. It depends on your path and your strengths.
Yeah, you don't, I think I've already answered, for clinical, you don't have to have done a master's to get onto the doctorate, but what they will be looking for is the 2 years experience and the graduate basis for chartership.
One question that's been up there for a while. I would love to know how many jobs realistically there are in educational psychology.
I have no idea.
We haven't got an educational psychologist on the panel.
The problem with it is training rather than jobs. It's great someone's asking about EdSite. It's a really important area, and it's been under a lot of pressure. The training for EdSite is still run nationally. It was nationalised. It was originally out to local education authorities, but it's... but it's now funded nationally.
I think it's feedback from that mic.
Feedback from that one.
Is it from this one?
I'll shout again.
No, I'll turn this one off.
I'm good with shouting. So the problem with EdPsych is that there's a limited number of training places. I think If my memory serves me right, it's about only about 150 training places in the whole country compared to about 600 for clinical psychology. But I mean, one of the reasons I was involved with the government tried to devolve it again, but we managed, as the BPS managed to sort of fight that off, and they kept up and actually have increased the training places in the last couple of years, because there are so many vacancies in local educational psychology departments. Have about, they were quoting the figures at this time, which was a couple of years ago, it was about a third of posts were vacant. So there are lots of jobs, but there are limited training places. But they are being increased. So don't be put off. But there is still a bit of a bottleneck at the training phase.
The other thing that might help there is the HEE, the Health Education England moves. So alongside the sort of psychological wellbeing practitioners, one of the areas that they're looking at is children's wellbeing practitioners. So not ed psych, but related for those who might want to go straight into a graduate career rather than pursuing the ed psych training. So.
Thank you. So next question has been hovering for a while. What is the difference between a psychotherapist and a clinical psychologist? Sorry.
There you go.
I'm looking towards Jemima to think. Shake it out. I guess the training routes are different. A clinical psychologist is, the training is salaried through the NHS, and psychotherapy, the training you would have to self-fund, I believe. And then the models that are used are very different. So in clinical psychology training, you'll be taught to use various models that you can adapt and draw upon when you're working with your clients. Whereas psychotherapy, I think, uses different models. Difficult question.
Some good questions.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say, it's a really tough one, because I asked this quite a lot, actually. And it's, the way I see it is sometimes with psychotherapy, there's a bit more, they don't focus on formulation in the same way. So as a clinical psychologist, we have a lot of training in formulation, which is, following an assessment with a client, how you understand how somebody has come to where they are now, what's brought them to this place, and therefore what intervention will be brought in. So I think we think slightly differently, but obviously there's a lot of crossover as well. And then David, you were saying about IACT, weren't you?
I mean, I think the fundamental difference is psychotherapy training is within one model of therapy. So here, I think we're sort of talking more about sort of psychodynamic psychotherapy, which is or systemic family therapy would be another one. You would be aware that in recent years, the provision of psychological therapies, particularly cognitive behaviour therapy, has increased a lot in the UK, and there is a pathway there for training as what's called a high-intensity therapist in CBT, which is that is a pathway where you're focusing just predominantly using one model of therapy. So I mean, these are pathways, and I think people, to be fair to them, psychotherapists do use formulation, but the key difference is you're being trained in one model of therapy, so you can become more specialised and experienced in that particular model of therapy, whereas psychologists, counselling psychologists, one of our sort of criteria of training is that we use more than one model of therapy. So that's something that's fundamental.
Okay, on to our next question. How essential is research experience before a master's or PhD application in pursuing a research career? That's my
I guess I'm here as the advocate for research careers, so this one probably comes to me. I think essential, no. Desirable, yes. So I think it's not that you have to have research experience. You all have research experience. If you've done a psychology qualification that gives you the graduate basis for chartership, you've done a final year project, or you've done a dissertation as part of a conversion course or as a part of a master's, you have research experience and you've gained project management skills and you can independently review literature, you can design research, you can conduct research, you can analyse data, and you can critically evaluate research. So you've got research experience as part of your degree. But you need to kind of think, well, you know, what area am I going into? Spending a little bit of time, even volunteering to work alongside a researcher in that area can give you an extra insight into whether you really are going to wake up every morning thinking, yay, I'm still passionate about the gazillionth paper on this topic. So it will help you. It may help raise your profile. So we've got some research experience. The BPS Summer internships are really useful. It's helpful, but it's not essential.
I think all of the BPS accredited master's degrees that lead to HCPC registration do require a research project. So you definitely have to get involved in research. And I also, it's certainly in sports psychology, people who have got a good research profile are much more likely to get a job, even if the job is basically as a practitioner. So I think the outside world wants people who have done research and are adept at continuing in that.
So technically we're out of time, but I'm actually going to propose we keep going for another 5 or 10 minutes and cut into lunchtime a bit, because I think it's been a really interesting discussion. And we've got a few more questions keyed up, so we'll just keep going for another 5 minutes or so. This one's quite an interesting one, and I think it might apply to all panel members. How do you think psychologists deal with their own mental health issues, and do you think there is stigma attached with this in the industry?
Yeah. So I think one of the things I always start off with on my MSc in Forensic Psychology programme is I talk about vicarious trauma and burnout, or however you want to term that, because I feel it's very important that all potential workers in that area understand and accept that sometimes you will suffer burnout and you will suffer vicarious trauma. For example, when I was in the police, it was a very macho, male-dominated environment, and God forbid I could come forward and say, I have an issue. And I realised myself when I was, part of my job as a senior investigating officer was to actually categorise and go through indecent images of children if there was an investigation. And after about 5 years, I thought, do you know what, I just can't do this anymore. I do not want to see another person being, horrible things being done to them. So I openly admitted that, and I was almost castigated by a lot of my colleagues that I was a wimp, I couldn't deal with it, and I shouldn't be a police officer, which is ridiculous. Nowadays, I think it's much better, but I think it's something that we've got to understand and accept. And I think most people nowadays do accept that. And there's nothing wrong with it if you don't feel okay sometimes.
Yeah, it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
I think certainly within academic careers and within teaching, you know, there's been a huge amount of media interest on mental health in universities, mental health in teaching environments, so teachers in schools and colleges, as well as university lecturers, students, postgraduate students, PhD students are among the most stressed individuals on the planet. And I think we need to acknowledge that. It's one of the most worthwhile and rewarding career routes that you can take, but it can be high pressure. We are held to account for an awful lot, particularly in academia. You know, I'm responsible for my students, I'm responsible for my colleagues, I'm responsible for research, I'm responsible for teaching. There's a lot of pressure on me to be excellent at a lot of different things. And I think, yeah, sometimes it's okay, or no, always it's okay just to say, do you know what, I'm not coping with this. And certainly in my experience, I've been able to go to my senior managers and say, I'm not coping, I need something taken from me, I need some help with this. And that's been absolutely fine. So I think, yes, I've been able to have quite open conversations, usually before I get myself into a pickle, rather than waiting until I'm, you know, drowning in depression or something and having to deal with it in a crisis. I think trying to speak up early is probably the best advice.
And I think it's about reflection as well, isn't it? Reflecting on what's happened and what made you feel that way, and actually understanding the processes behind that, and then taking action to help yourself. But also, you know, sometimes you may not need to speak to one of your managers or your supervisor, but it's about reflecting and understanding what's happened. And I think one of the biggest things as psychologists nowadays is reflective practice. And I think most courses will teach that now to try and help you through some of the more difficult times.
And I think definitely using supervision to process and think about the things that it might be bringing up for you in your job or when you're studying. So as an assistant, I have weekly supervision. Each week kind of taking things that I need to my supervisor really helps me to think about the impact of the work that I'm doing on my own mental health and how it's making me feel. So supervision is, really, really, really important for these things. Do you want to add anything?
Can I just add just a tiny point to this? I just want to, I think these are really important points about managing the stress of training, but I just want to make a point that often people come into fields, particularly those around mental health, because of lived experience themselves, either themselves or members of their families, and that's very common. UCL have done some research looking at this in clinical psychology trainees and find, sometimes trying to remember the exact figure, it's about 2/3 of people, they did a national survey of people, clinical psychology trainees had some prior lived experience. I think it was personally or immediate family, but I can't remember. It was a high number of people that had personal lived experience of mental health issues or family issues. And that's, it's certainly, and as Jemima was saying, it's not something that it certainly doesn't preclude you coming into this kind of line of work. It can often be something really valuable to draw on. So I just wanted to add that to the, I wouldn't want people to feel that, I've had previous experience of mental health issues and it's going to be so stressful, so I should really see it clearly. That's, people often come into this kind of work because of personal lived experience or experience in their families.
Yeah.
And we welcome that.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more quick question and then we'll wrap things up. So it's been there for a while, and I think it's primarily a question for Gavin. Is there a preference for a specific postgraduate route in becoming a forensic psychologist?
So a preference for forensic psychology?
The route.
I think, it all depends. I mean, to become a qualified forensic psychologist, as I mentioned before, you would have to do the two-stage process. The MSc in forensic psychology, which must be accredited by the BPS, followed by the 2-year supervised practice. Now, that could be with the BPS, or it could be with the HCPC. Some universities now are offering postgraduate diplomas in forensic psychology practice, which will give you the kind of automatic right to apply to the HCPC register. Again, I think when you're doing your research in those different areas and where you're working at that point, it might be more investigative psychology, which is what I'm interested in, but it might be more the assessment and treatment side, which is where the vast majority of forensic psychologists work. So I think that answered the question.
Sounds good to me. And I think at that point, we better wrap things up. We've gone slightly over. So thank you very much for questions and a round of applause for our speakers.